Alright, so in this video I want to show how to move a character, specifically the player character, who has kind of a fancy setup that makes it not work super great out of the box with dialogue system during a dialogue sequence. So if we look at this setup that I have right here, I've set up a little sequence that's meant to look like the player's being chased by the zombie, and then eventually they get inside the gate. But the problem is that the player actually doesn't move. So I have like a couple options of like what I could do is I could just like, so you can see like when I hit thanks for letting me in, I'm still outside of the gate because this is how I framed it to look cool with the zombie behind me. But when I'm done, I want the player to look like they've moved in here, right? So I'm kind of like left with this tough decision of like, do I make the beginning look cool, but then you're not where you're supposed to be? Or do I make the beginning look dumb, but you're where you're supposed to be once you regain player control? And so really we don't want any of those options. Instead, what we want to do is start the player out here in the little cutscene and then use a sequencer command to move the player here, like while we're like zoomed in on one of these characters, and then when we return to a view of the player, it'll look as though they've moved. So basically we're going to show how to move actors in sequencer commands. And so like here's the structure of that sequence here, and I can decide where I want to move the player. I think I want to move it here so you can't see it, but there's a lot of variety. Like if we actually made it look like they're playing a running animation, it's kind of like a whole nother ball game. And there's like, if I really wanted to, make this look pretty detailed, what I would look into, there's a tool called Timeline, and you should learn it if you want to make like a detailed cutscene. And dialogue system can work with timeline too, but it's kind of beyond the scope of what I want to go into for this. So instead of like showing the player like moving with the animation into the correct spot, I'm going to kind of like make it look like the player was moving when we were looking at Jody here, or when we were looking at Pete, and then by the time we got back to the player, they're inside the gate. So I'm going to move the player actually here during the Jody sequence. So I'm just going to hit a new line. This is like what's moving the camera to look at Jody. This is holding it on her for 3 seconds. And I'm going to add something called MoveTo. And if we bring up the sequencer command reference, you can see there's a MoveTo command in here. And it takes a parameter. The first parameter would be where you want to move. So you have to actually give it a game object that you want to move to. And so what I'm going to do is go to my game object window. I'm going to hit create empty. And it gives you this empty game object, which you can move around. And I want to make sure that it's like on the ground. So that would be important. I don't know if that would be y equals 0. That appears to be underground to me. So maybe like y equals 1. Maybe it's best if I actually just look down one of these axes, switch to isometric mode, and just kind of line it up with another character's feet. So somewhere around here. I'm going to click again to exit the isometric camera because I want to be in perspective mode while I'm moving around the scene. And then like I want to move the player like in here, but I want them to be facing Pete. So I'm going to use the rotate tool, right? And rotate this. And as long as you're on local here, you'll be able to see the blue arrow is which direction the player is pointing. If you want to be more precise, you can go to the top view, switch back to orthographic again, and you can really see how things are aiming. So I could put it like something like that. And No clue how this is going to look yet. We'll check it out. Let's switch back to perspective mode. And so I'm going to name this thing like MoveTo Target or something. Well, let's just call it Target. That's easier for now. And if you're going to have a lot of these, like what I would probably do once I've got this set up how I want is maybe make this a child of the starting sequence, because it looks like I was already trying to set that up once before. The reason I would do that is because like if you have a million things laying around called target, it might get confusing, and you'd have to actually give them all unique names because we have to plug them in as parameters. So maybe I'd call it starting something like that. I don't know, just to keep things organized. And then so back in my script, inside of MoveTo, the first parameter is going to be this thing that I called starting sequence target, and you want to make sure you spell that just right. And the second parameter, second parameter is who is gonna move, so that's gonna be my player. So we're gonna call it player here. And then the third parameter is how long to take to move there. So if we had a setup where the animations could like play in place and not like our animations have root motion, which is problematic, which it's great for like making them look good when we're playing. But what that means is that the animation moves the player. So there's kind of two ways you could do animation. One is where the animation's just playing like in place, like the player's jogging in place, and then in code we move the player. And so if we use this MoveTo sequence and we had an animation that was playing in place, we could actually say, okay, we want you to take like 2 seconds to get from where you are to where you're going. And then we could use the animation, the play animator sequences to like get the character to look like they're playing a run in place animation while they're moving, and it would look like they're moving, and that would be cool. But we're using root motion in this setup, so it just doesn't work like that. So what I want this to do is just like instantly teleport the player to that spot. So by default that's supposed to be no parameters, or you could put 0 there. And then we need a semicolon at the end. This is how it would work if we weren't using root motion. But because we are using root motion, I actually had to make a custom node. I can kind of show you what I mean. Like basically our animation is trying to move the character constantly. So like if I find the player, let's go to the scene window here. And find the player. Let's get all this crap hidden. Here's the player. So watch what happens if I try to move the player. See how it's just like popping back to where they started? It's like impossible to actually move the player here. So we have to disable root motion. So check out what happens if I uncheck apply root motion. Now I can move it. So we have to disable root motion, then teleport the player, and then turn it back on when the player is about to like resume gameplay, because it uses that root motion to actually move the character around under player control. So we need it eventually. Anyway, I made a custom sequencer command. So if you go into scripts, into custom sequencer commands, there's one that says MoveToRootMotion. This one will disable root motion, move the character, and then turn it back on. So I'm going to stop this and go back to my dialog and find the spot where I was trying to move the player here. And instead of using the normal MoveTo, I'm going to use this MoveToRootMotion. And that should work. However, I think there's a bug. So you can try it and see if it works for you. But for me at least, I have an issue, and I really don't know why. I haven't had time to figure this out. Where if I try to make it move instantly, it just doesn't work. So I have to give it some kind of time. I'm going to give it a longer time just so you can kind of see it do its thing. And I guess what I'll do is let's move like the game window down here. Oh, I just saw a player move. I wanted to move the game window so you could see them actually move up there in the scene window. So help, and then this guy talks, and when Jody talks, watch the player, see them move. So you could see if they were playing like a jog in place animation, that would look right. It would look cool, like they're running. So we don't actually want it to take 1 second to move. We want it to be like essentially instantaneous. I'll try putting 0 here and see if it works. So like I said, I've had a bug in the past where it just, for whatever reason, doesn't work unless I give it some kind of time. Yeah, see, she didn't move. Don't know what's up with that. So instead, let's just put a very small number, like 0.1. I could probably even put 0.01, really. It's like super fast. And we should see them just right over there. Right when we move the camera to Jody. Oh, that didn't work either. So maybe it has to be longer than... All right, let's try 0.1. This is a strange bug. I can't explain it. There we go. So 0.1 worked. If you look down here, it's invisible to the player because they only see the camera angles we're showing them. And then when I'm done, when I click out of this, you can see I'm actually in here. I'm not out where I started. So you can use this to move any actor you want in a dialogue sequence. And just remember, when you put your target down, it's not just the position that's being used, but it's also the rotation that's being used. And I should point out there's another command you can use called look at. So look at, what it will do is rotate the subject to look at whatever the target is that you supply. So it's really good, like, to solve this problem where, like, if the player tries to talk to the character from like the side, you might want to have him rotate and face the character. So you could put it at in the beginning of your sequence whenever you talk to this guy that he rotates and faces the player. And you don't need anything special about root motion because rotation is not going to be overridden by our root motion system here. So you can just use the regular built-in look at sequencer command to rotate things in sequences if you ever want to do that. Or you can use MoveTo and just rotate the target. All right, so if with the look at and the MoveToRootMotion command, I'll just show you that one more time so you can make sure you don't miss it here. I put it in this one, MoveToRootMotion. So the secret for our game is we have to add root motion to the end of the MoveTo. And so with these two tools, you should be able to get a lot of dynamic sequences in place for your little demonstration in your interactive town.